I'm here today with Sergeant Frank Jang, who is currently with Media Relations and Strategic Communications for the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, often referred to as IHIT. Prior to his media relations role, Frank was a homicide investigator and supervisor for IHIT. During that time, he was a primary investigator, a file coordinator, crime scene manager, interviewer, affiant, and computer examiner. And prior to those roles, he was a drug enforcement officer with the federal RCMP. So today we're going to talk about the role of the police in a homicide investigation. And thank you, Frank, for joining us today. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Jessica. Yeah, good to be with you.
Good. So let's just jump right in. Tell me about the role of the police in a homicide investigation and what goes on at IHIT.
Yeah. So IHIT, we investigate obviously homicides, suspicious deaths, suspicious or missing person investigations where foul play is suspected. So that's our mandate. We cover a fairly large area. Just for people who aren't familiar with IHIT, we cover basically from Pemberton, just north of Whistler, all the way out east towards to Boston Bar, everything in between, minus Vancouver City and Delta, including Sechelt, the Sunshine Coast, Gibson's, that area. So that's a large area. It keeps us busy, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's made up of RCMP officers as well as 4 municipal forces: West Vancouver, Abbotsford, New Westminster, and Port Moody. Homicide investigations, I'll say this, isn't quite like how it's depicted on TV shows and movies. We do things a little bit differently. I think it'll surprise some people. Certainly, it's not, two partners in trench coats going out and, like a Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson type situation. It's far from that. And I can explain that if you like.
So what you're telling us is it's not solved in an hour.
No, unlike, we certainly wish we could solve all of them in an hour, and actually some do take a short period of time. We identify the suspect right away, and some, as a lot of people know, some investigations take a bit longer than that.
Mm-hmm. So tell me more about how it's not like the TV and how does it go?
Sure, yeah. So at IHIT, and really it's not just IHIT, but other major crimes units within the RCMP and outside the RCMP, we employ a method called major case management. And so IHIT, there's 110 employees here, 80 of whom are sworn police officers, detectives, investigators. We have about 7 investigative teams made up of about 8 to 9 officers, 8 to 9. So that's obviously different than, again, the Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson model. So out of these 8 to 9 investigators, each investigator has a role. So some of the roles, I'll mention it, is a primary investigator, file coordinator, affiant.
Tell us what an affiant is.
Affiant. Oh, great question. So all the students out there who enjoy or not enjoy doing all-nighters, papers, that's kind of what an affiant is. Affiant is somebody who drafts judicial authorization. So there's often times where there is an expectation of privacy, whether it's a home, a vehicle, cell phone, where you need to go to a judicial authority, a judicial justice of the peace, or perhaps even a judge to seek that authorization. And how that authorization is obtained is you need to draft a document, an affidavit, right? It's very technical writing. And there are some investigators that are great at it. And we have those investigators here at IHIT. And it's basically you're telling the story of the investigation or the investigation up to that point that you're seeking that particular authorization. So it's really once upon a time, this is what happened. This is why we need to go into that place to get that particular item, which we believe is in there. And we believe, it's going to afford evidence to the investigation somehow. So it's really explaining in word format why you need to go to a particular place to get to obtain evidence. It's
Okay.
very technical. So again, it's you gotta dot all your periods and cross all your T's. Spelling mistakes, yeah, definitely a no-no. So it's very technical writing. You really have to have an eye for detail. And some investigators really that's their talent, and we're happy we have those investigators here at IHIT. But that's one role, the affiant, and there's
Right.
others, as I mentioned.
Okay, yeah, so you mentioned crime scene manager, file coordinator, affiant. Okay, so we have many different roles with the 8 or 9 investigators that are on your 7 teams. So then what happens?
Yeah. So at the beginning of the investigation, really the call comes in at any time of the day.
Mhm.
It's the call at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Those are easy ones because obviously we're all up. But the ones that come in at 2 or 3 in the morning, those are difficult. But we all understand. There's always one team, one IHIT team that's always on call, ready for the next investigation. And when that call comes in, off they go. When they're in their beds, they get up, they put on their suits, their business attire. They put on the gun, get in, they get their briefcase, get in their cars, and off they go. And again, everyone has different roles. The crime scene manager, so the IHIT investigator in charge of the crime scene will oftentimes go straight to the crime scene, take charge of that area. But for most of the team, they head to the detachment or the police department, and they'll set up. It's really kind of the control room or the briefing room. It's usually the office at the major crime unit of the detachment or the police department. It's a big table. We'll all set up around it, and it's really in the beginning. It's just wires, cables, laptops being set up. There's a lot of activity. There's people coming and going, and we'll have our initial briefing, which can take a few hours really, because that's when all the investigators, all the frontline officers who were involved in attending, in going to the initial call, the initial 911 call, they'll all come in and we'll brief with each one of them, and we'll capture every single detail, so we don't miss anything. And from there, basically, that's how the homicide investigation begins. That's where our primary investigator, team leader, team commander, and everybody on the team, they'll have the discussion and say, what's our next course of action? Who do we need to interview? Where do we need to go? What piece of evidence do we feel is, and that's where really the investigational strategy is developed from. It's a lot, there's a lot going on. And really the first, at least the first few days, you don't get much rest, if any. It's go, go, go.
I imagine speed is of the essence sometimes with these investigations.
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's evidence that could perish, right? Whether it's physical evidence in the rain, in the snow, in the wind, that's out there, and we need to get it right away. Whether it's electronic evidence that could be erased, we need to get it right away, and that's why oftentimes you hear us making the appeal for video footage, whether it's video surveillance footage at a home or at a business, or whether it's dash cam video. Dash cam video is often overwritten after a couple of days, so we need to get that message out there right away for people to download that footage and capture it on a memory stick. So there's a lot of evidence that we need to get right away, because if we wait, it's gone and we're never going to get that back. That's why it's so urgent.
Yeah. So you mentioned that, of course, they go out to the scene, and let's say that an incident happened at a home, and I know through some information here, or through our victims of homicide support groups, that we hear some really tough stories about how family members cannot go to their person who has, I mean, they're going through this big trauma. Their person has been murdered, perhaps maybe near them, in front of them, and yet they are prevented from touching that person, from saying goodbye, which leads to a lot of healing that needs to happen on our end in these support groups. Can you help explain why that is?
Yeah. I'm going to be super careful in how I answer this question because we all understand, I think, when I say we, investigators, us, we understand the need, the necessity for families to grieve, right? It's just, we wish it could, you know, coincide nicely with our investigations. We really do. But it's so important, I guess, and I don't like using this word victim, but the loved one that's passed away, that's the family's loved one. That's the family's son, brother, sister, mother. We understand that. As homicide investigators, we have to keep in mind of the evidence, and sometimes the evidence is on the very person, is on their clothes. If it was a shooting, there could be gunshot residue on the clothing that we need to confirm. There could be actual DNA evidence that was left, on the clothing, on the person. And so it's important that we don't disturb that until our forensic specialists have a chance to, respectfully go through the clothing. Oftentimes there will be an autopsy, and it's something I know a lot of families, have mixed feelings about. But certainly as investigators, it's important because there's so much evidence that we gather from the autopsy. Really, the number one really is the cause of death. Sometimes if it's a shooting, it's obvious it's a shooting. It's a shooting, right? We understand that. Sometimes it's not so obvious. It's not so clear, the cause of death. And that's why we do need a forensic pathologist who's trained, who's qualified to give us that answer. So that's one of the reasons we do an autopsy. But really, to make a long answer short is, as investigators, we're human beings. We understand. We feel terrible about what happened. But as investigators, as people who've been entrusted to find the culprits, to find the killers, right? That's our job. And, in order to do that, we need to, try to detach our emotions as much as we can from what's going on, and really do a professional job and just kind of look at the evidence. Where is the evidence? How can we gather the evidence? Because really, ultimately, that's how you help families,
Right.
is by collecting the evidence and finding the people who did it.
Okay. And we're going to deal with this in a separate recording, but there are victim service people that come with you on site to a homicide scene or a sudden death scene.
Yeah. So at IHIT, we have a family liaison, a victim service worker here with us, and she won't go to the crime scene, but she will certainly accompany our primary investigator and deliver the news to the family.
Okay.
Really, she's there to provide not just emotional support, but just to answer all these questions, because family members, for a lot of our families, it's the first time they've lost a loved one,
Right.
let alone losing somebody to homicide.
Right.
They don't know about how to work with the coroner service or the funeral home or the hospital. So they have so many questions, and that's why we have her here, and she's been such a great resource.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, so just trying to balance that out. So the investigators have a very functional role. However, there is support on the emotional side of things through your family liaison.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. And we also reach out to
Go ahead.
And yeah, and not just our victim service worker, but also we reached out to our partners from BC Victims of Homicide, BC Bereavement Helpline.
Mhm.
And so there's, we don't just work within IHIT. Obviously, we have partners in the community as well, right? Such as your group there, Jessica. So, we understand, families, they need as much help as, as they can get, right? So, we offer the resources, yeah, and it's not just within IHIT, obviously, it's in the community as well.
Okay, right. Can you explain about bringing the investigation of a case to what is called charge approval? Can you enlighten on just the role of the police in gathering charges and how that gets through to the court system, and why BC is a little different than the rest of the country, except for Quebec, I believe.
Yeah. Charge approval for us at IHIT really is the finish line. The charge approval is the finish line for us, and that's what we strive for each of our investigations, because what happens afterwards, that's the prerogative of course, Crown Counsel, BC Prosecution Service. That's when they take over the case from us. Now, my understanding, I've only worked here in BC in my 17 years of service, but how it works in BC is that charge approval rests with Crown Counsel, with the BC Prosecution Service. Certainly it does for homicide investigations. So we can't, as much as we'd like, perhaps, we can't go and lay what we call the information, the charge. We can't go to the courthouse and say, look, we feel we have enough evidence, and we want a charge laid on this particular person. We can't do that. We don't do that. We work with the BC Prosecution Service. Our job as investigators, as the police, is to gather evidence. Plain and simple, is to work within the legal, moral, ethical framework that we've been given by the powers that be, by the government, by the courts, the judges in our country. And we work within that framework. Within that framework, our job is to gather evidence, plain and simple. And once we gather that evidence, we sit down with the BC Prosecution Service and we'll do a presentation where we will basically tell the story and we'll show the evidence that's been gathered. And the decision to charge or not to charge rests with the BC Prosecution Service.
And that's different than, say, outside of BC, correct? It's the police that file charges and other.
Yeah, my understanding is in other provinces, I believe the police can and do lay the charge themselves. I'm not sure if that's the case for homicides.
Okay.
But that's certainly not the practice here in BC.
And you mentioned gathering evidence. So, your police teams and investigators will gather evidence. How long does that take?
It can take as short as, it can take a day. Some cases are actually solved right away, and persons can be charged really, the next day, maybe even the same day. Depends how quickly we can gather that evidence and present that evidence to Crown Counsel. Some cases, they do take a bit longer. And, we always say you can't rush the evidence. You can't obviously you can't make up the evidence. That's a big no-no, obviously. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the evidence takes time. And I'll say this, in the beginning, as I said, in the beginning of the investigation, it's go, go, go. There's so much action to gather the perishable evidence, collecting video, we're collecting DNA, forensic evidence, all these things. And we have all this evidence. And sometimes despite the evidence that we have, we're just not there in terms of charge approval. And so, sometimes days, weeks go by, months go by. Fortunately, for some cases, years go by. And this is where I'm speaking from experience, where I'm recalling now some of the cases that IHIT's been involved in is we've had cases where we have all this evidence, and then whether it's just timing or the person who's able to speak to the evidence, who can corroborate all this evidence, that person has come to maybe a better position in life, come to a better place in life than they were during the homicide, and that person. Whether it's the efforts of investigators, knocking on doors constantly, or that person just choosing to do the right thing, that person coming forward and speaking to our investigators and taking all this evidence and being able to corroborate it, basically saying, oh yeah, that evidence, yeah, this is what happened. And that's all we need to go back to Crown Counsel and say, look, now we have somebody who can speak to all this evidence that we had. We didn't have this person. We didn't have a human being to tell the story. Now we do. And that could be years after the fact, right? And that is, that's happened to a number of our cases recently. And that's why we keep saying, we can't give up hope. We can't give up hope. We have a lot of evidence, really, on most, I would say maybe all of our cases. We get good evidence, but sometimes it's just, we need that human being to tell the story, to corroborate that evidence.
So you need that corroboration to make it as good a case as possible so that the Crown will approve it?
Yeah, so when we're talking about the criminal offenses associated to homicide, so namely, manslaughter, second-degree murder, first-degree murder, these are very serious offenses. One would argue maybe the most serious criminal offenses that we have in our criminal code. And so as the police, we can't approach BC prosecution services with just a theory or conjecture. We'll probably get laughed at. We need to approach them with solid evidence, right? And because we all understand, you don't charge people with murder based on conjecture, right? You need to have evidence, and so that responsibility falls on us. It's a lot of work, but that's why homicide investigations are so laborious. They're difficult. Because as much as we like evidence on trees where we can just pluck them and put them in our evidence basket, it's not gonna happen that way. We're gonna have to work for it.
Yeah.
And investigations where when you're talking about first degree, planned, involving criminal organizations, those types of things, it's especially difficult because like I said, they're often planned. There's thought put into it, and oftentimes it involves gangs, drugs, organized crime, and so those investigations are certainly difficult because you don't get cooperation, at least not right away. But we certainly don't keep trying, and we've had successful outcomes on those types of cases. Just at the tail end of 2020. I think it was week after week for about 5 weeks. There were first-degree murder charges being laid. There was one in Abbotsford, a few in Surrey, involving drugs, involving gangs. So, don't ever say that police can't solve gang murders, gang homicides. That is simply not the case. We solve them all the time.
So it sounds like then a case is with IHIT. And you don't forget about it. You mentioned, we don't forget. And until it reaches charge approval with Crown Counsel. And then in that instance, then are the police essentially done with their portion of the investigation?
No. As much as we like to, maybe sometimes, just kind of give, pass it on and walk away. No, we can't do that, and we don't do that. Even with charge approval, there's a lot of work actually still to be done. Disclosure. You might often hear police officers talk about disclosure. Well, I don't know if people realize the amount of work that happens. See, this is the one thing that TV shows and movies don't show you is the paperwork, the amount of paperwork that happens behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
Because, a report to a Crown Counsel, right, telling the story of the case, it's not a 5-pager,
Right.
right? In fact, it's not even a hard copy. Now it's, you're getting into external hard drive. You're getting into thousands and thousands of documents that need to be compiled, that need to be searched, and, you need to make sense of it. And that's where file coordinators and file coordination teams come into place. People who's basically, they have a mind that is so organized that they can, just coordinate things and basically be able to pick out a document from among the thousands of documents. Those are people who love spreadsheets, right? We all know those types of people, right? And God bless them. I'm glad we have them here at IHIT. But there is a mountain of work in terms of disclosure, in terms of getting all the documents to forward to BC Prosecution Service, because they in turn at some point will have to provide that to the accused defense counsel, because they have to be able to provide an answer in defense to the allegations, right? So, it's a lot of work. I know for the media, when we announce charges, they think, yay, we got charge approval. No, for our investigators, for a lot of them, that's actually when the work begins.
Really?
Right? So we're providing support to the prosecution to provide all the disclosure. Anything from reports to police officers' notes, just everything, right?
So they're on hand throughout the whole trial process for that evidence disclosure, paperwork,
Absolutely.
notes.
Even, if the case goes to trial, right? We're there actually on the stand testifying, providing evidence to a judge or jury. We're there in the gallery with the media, with the families, right? Providing support, right? The work doesn't end for us. And even afterwards, I just now I recall investigations where it's gone to court, the person was found guilty. And even then you think it's over, but, especially the relationships that we develop with family members, that continues on even after, the gavel comes down, right? I'm not going to mention their names. I don't want to embarrass them, but I know a couple that comes to mind. Their young son was a victim of homicide, and I think of them often. And I know they participated in previous forums and events hosted by BC Bereavement Helpline. And so yeah, we don't. Those are relationships that life. Yes, life throws us together.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of a lifelong thing, right?
Yep, it is. It is. It's a life-changing event, and it's nice to know that you have a commitment and your team has a commitment to the families throughout the process, and even as you said, it's when it's over, but it's not really over. So that's good to hear. Thank you for this information. It's been really, really eye-opening to understand all of the amount of work that needs to be done to bring a homicide investigation to trial, and then even all that work when it gets approved and into the court system. So thank you for that very much. Frank.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Hopefully it'll help a few people answer some questions. So yeah, thank you.